The last sheet we're going to talk about briefly, we don't really call it an archaeological sheet, but it is a recording sheet, is for burials. So there's actually three subcategories. There's an adult, there's a juvenile, and there is an infant. And we'll get those to pop up on the screen so you can have a quick look. We're only going to talk through one of them. We'll talk through the adult. It's the easiest to do and probably the one you'd encounter the most. And most of the time when I'm talking as well, I'll be hypothesizing that we're digging a medieval site like we have in Carrick here, or like we would have been digging in the monastery in Ferns. So we'll hypothesize that they're medieval burials that we're talking about. A lot of the information again is similar to what you'll see on the cut and fill sheets that we've already talked about. So in the top bar, as you look at it on the adult sheet, you'll have the excavation number, which is the same, will be the same for that site, the address, the area and grid, the supervisor, the date, the excavators, they're all the same. You will see there's also a B number instead of an F number. That's obviously for the burial number. And the burials, again, will typically start in blocks of hundreds. So, well, not always actually. On some sites you might go straight from burial 1, so it could be B1, B2, B3, B4, etc. Okay? Then it's asked for the simple numbers of different elements like the grave cut, the coffin and the grave fill, what those numbers are, and the burial type. Is it simple? So it's the third row down, or second row down in the second category. Is it simple? Is it stone lined? Are there pillow stones? So a stone put behind the skull, earmuffs, stones put here. Was the burial interred in a coffin? Was it in a cyst? And if it was in a cyst, was it short or long? By cyst we mean obviously a stone surround. Okay. Just to mention about the coffin, obviously coffins typically are made of timber, so frequently you will not see evidence of the coffin. It could be gone, but you might get a nice set of nails bordering the burial where the coffin once was. So you might get evidence of a coffin where there isn't the physical remains left of the timber itself. Okay. Then directly below that you'll see a nice image of the burial and of both sides of the skull. So you're assuming the burial's facing this way, but if you turn either side, okay, so you can see the side of the skull, and this is very simple. You just colour in what bones are present, okay, and that's why you can also see both sides of the skull, so you can colour in what sides of the bone are there. When you've got to the point of colouring this in, you're actually at mid-excavation in the burial itself, okay, so we better talk briefly about how you've gotten there, because obviously we can't excavate from afar over a camera like this. When you're excavating, or certain we'd be excavating on a medieval site, there's certain little tips and certain little things you need to know. So let's assume for the purposes of today that we are on a medieval site and the burials are laid out nicely in rows, okay, going from east to west. So the head positioned to the west, looking east, as would be the burial rite. The head typically, or the skull, will be the highest up position in the grave. So where all things are equal, you should start at the west end, because you'll probably hit the skull first, and that will give you a good orientation point of where to start from and how to progress. Now, of course, the burial could be put in an unusual position. It could be prone, it could be face down, but you have to work with the best knowledge you have. So if you start at the west end, you're quite likely to pick up the skull first and then be able to orientate yourself. You don't want to be starting near small little bones like phalanges or tarsals, where you could lose them quite easily, okay? When you're excavating, you'll typically start with a trowel. It won't be any bigger tool than that, a 4-inch pointing trowel, and you'll have a series of wooden tools, because the metal can damage the bone, to use as soon as you get to the point of exposing bone. All archaeological tools tend to be recycled, so a lot of what we use would actually be clay modelling tools in wood or in plastic, little small plastic scoops to put the soil onto, and indeed paintbrushes, etc. You very, very carefully expose the bone, paying most attention to the hands and the feet, and very gently exposing those areas where small bones are. On most well-run research digs, you'll also sieve everything to make sure that no small bones are lost, especially if you're dealing with smaller individuals, such as infants. So it's a very slow process, a very careful process, where you orientate yourself and then carefully move along. When you have the burial fully exposed, that's the point that you get to colour in this, and that you get to do the archaeological drawings. We'll talk about how to do those in another video. When you get to take your archaeological levels, which you'll typically take on the skull, the sacrum, the feet, when you get to fill out the other record sheets. The likes of the fill and the cut, those sheets, you will be filling out those as you go because you may find something in them as you're excavating them, okay? So you fill those out as you go. When the burial is fully recorded, so we're talking about photographs taken, drawings taken, sheets fully filled in, any grave goods that were visible, bagged and tagged, we'll come back to that in a second. At that point, you want to lift the remains. And there's a very set way of doing that, of how the burial is bagged. So different body parts go in different bags, such as left foot, left hand, right hand. Skull will go by itself very carefully, left ribs, right ribs, etc. But we'll pop up a full list of these on my right hand side, okay? Certain areas need particular attention paid to them. So obviously there's nothing left holding this individual together in terms of, well, presumably, in terms of any sort of ligaments or sinews or tissues. So you don't want to take too much soil out from between the ribs because they'll just collapse in. You don't want to take too much soil out from the skull because that could collapse in on itself. So you've got to excavate very carefully, and you should definitely have a bioarchaeologist either on site dictating how things are done. So I've excavated numerous burials, but I would also have a bioarchaeologist on site because I am not a specialist bioarchaeologist. Either telling you how things are done or preferably being there all the time, but if not, certainly coming for regular visits and sort of dictating the research design. They may ask you to do various different things, such as take a sample from the skull to look for parasites. They'll probably tell you to take large soil samples from around the pelvis to recover kidney stones. As I said, they'll tell you probably to sieve a lot to get tarsals, to get phalanges, smaller bones. So there'll be a research design where the bioarchaeologist works in tandem with the archaeologist to get the most information back. When the bones are lifted, they're put into bags, holes put in the bags to make sure they can breathe very carefully. And at that point, they'll be washed and let dried. And again, the bioarchaeologist will inform how this should be done. And indeed, much of this will be discussed by Dr. Linda Lynch in later videos and later interactive sessions. It's worth saying though, and again, I'll get this popped up beside me, that there's even an order that the bones should be stored in boxes because you don't obviously want heavy bones on the top and light brittle bones on the bottom. So there's a way that the burials should be packed and bagged and tagged before they get washed and before they go for specialist analysis, okay? So that sort of makes some sort of sense just to give you the wider excavation strategies, I guess. But as I said, when you're mid-excavation, you've coloured this in and then it's starting to ask you for additional information. So the preservation, that is not presence or absence. So if the bone is in very good condition, but half it has been removed by someone laying a drainage pipe hundreds of years later, if the bone is in good condition, the preservation is good, even if a lot of it has been removed, if that makes sense, okay? What position is the burial within its grave cut or its cyst or wherever it's buried? Is it prone? Is it face down? Is it extended? Laid out? Is it crouched? Etc., okay? Again, the weather conditions go in here, just as they do on the fill sheet. And again, this is a good indication if we put in saturated or very wet, we know we have to get to that bone and look at it very quickly. It has to be got to laboratory and addressed very quickly, okay? The field diagram you'll see here is basically to give a sketch of the skeleton, all right? But the skeleton itself, as well as the immediate features such as cuts, coffins, cysts, etc., okay? And other burials immediately associated with the skeleton. So it is a very rough sketch of what is going on in the group, maybe of the row that it's in or the various different elements that make up its immediate surrounds, all right? The physical recording is similar but slightly different to the information on the sheets. What cuts are through or around the burial? What does it overlie? What is within the cut? What fills? What's it cut by? What's it contemporary with? And are there any associated finds, okay? And since we're on finds, we're going to take just a slight little detour into the finds themselves, and again this will pop up beside me. So this again is to capture where archaeological finds come from, the bagged finds register, okay? So if we imagine that this is burial 1, okay, it was placed in fill 101 and the cut for fill 101 is 102. So they're sort of the three numbers we're dealing with in this scenario. Burial 1, the fill is 101, the cut is 102, all right? The first finds that we find from that would be bag 101, and they'd be from feature 101 because that's the fill number, okay? Then you put in what sort of finds they are. Are they ceramic, stone, metal, etc., and what period they're from. Are they prehistoric? Are they medieval? Are they modern? What do they come from? And how many fines are in the bag, okay? So the bagged fines register is just the first level of tracing the archaeological artifacts you're getting. It goes to a second stage in the laboratory where all the fines are taken in, given individual numbers, and in Ireland put into a very set database that the standards are given to us by the National Museum of Ireland, okay? With all fines for burials, for other features you mightn't do it for all the fines, you'd only do it for significant ones. The archaeologist will make a call on that. With all fines for burials, you'll get coordinates of exactly where they came from, and we'll teach you how to take coordinates in the planning and survey video, and you'll get meters above sea level for all the fines, and again we'll teach you how to do that in the planning and survey video, and date and initials. So that's what we would use as a bagged fines register. But you'll notice for a forensic setting, it is almost identical to an evidence or bag log, which is popping up beside me now. It is worth saying that archaeologists are frequently called in to do the excavation of forensic anthropology cases. This is something that Dr. Linda Lynch will talk about a lot more. We effectively employ forensic level analysis to the excavation and documentation of human remains. So we might do it for different purposes. We might do it because we're looking at an historic population rather than a modern murder case or a modern population, but the processes are largely identical or are certainly very similar. So the evidence bag log again has the date, again has the name, it has the description of contents, and it has a chain of custody, so who is holding onto that bag now. So that's one difference to the bag fines register. We would assume that everything the archaeologist is holding with the chain of custody, we'd want to know exactly where that evidence is at any given point. And then there's a bag number and a description of contents. So the only real difference is where the physical evidence is at any given time. Otherwise, the evidence log and the bag fines register are virtually identical, okay? Coming back to the adult burial sheet then, you'll have your matrix, which is exactly the same as we talked about with the cut and fill sheets. The only difference, I guess, is it's asking for a burial number in the middle. So this, I think we said, is burial 1. So the cut would go underneath that because it's what came before it, 102, and the fill will go on top because it's 101, all right? There's a supervisor checklist again, and then we will flip over. And on the back, you will see there's a sketch, okay? To do a sketch location of the skeleton within the grid or the square, always include 2 grid references. You're prompted on that. Again, there's a second place where you can enter the excavation number, the address, the burial number. Levels are required again, and it prompts you to take the levels on the skull, the sacrum, on the feet. So that's a bare minimum of where you should take the levels. If there are artifacts or if there are grave goods in the burial, you should also take levels on them there. If there's anything interesting about the burial, you might want to take additional levels there, okay? Then there's a narrative. It asks for a narrative description of the position of all the major elements of the burial. Where is the right leg, right hand, skull, etc., feet, all relative to each other, okay? At the bottom, there's a little box of what plan numbers, photographs, etc. Have been generated in association with that burial. That is almost identical to the box that's on the cut and fill sheet. The only difference is that again it prompts samples. Have you taken samples from the skull and have you taken them from the pelvic area? As I mentioned, these can be assessed for lots of different reasons, including for kidney stones, including for parasites. And there's an area for additional comments and description, okay? The other burial sheets, including the juvenile and the infant, are pretty much identical. They've just got different images on them, like this. Because obviously the bones are different. Some may not have fused, and obviously they're on an entirely different scale. So they are the burial sheets. We do not tend to put the burials into the archaeological matrix on cut and fill sheets as feature numbers, obviously, because they're individuals. So we will write them in slightly differently. But other than that, most of the recording that goes on a burial sheet, other than the presentation of the bones, the information on the bones, is very similar to the cut and fill sheet.